I was born in Britain, but from immigrant parents. I was educated in Britain, but then I lived nomadically around Europe for many years, living in 10 different countries. And then about 20 years ago, I came back to Britain and settled down. We came from northern India, what's now Punjab down through Rajasthan, and we left India in several different migrations between the middle of the first millennium AD and the middle of the second, the first wave of us arriving in Europe probably around 800 years ago. We settled initially in the Balkans, and from there we spread out from the Middle Ages onwards across all of Europe. I enjoyed it. It's hard because it's hard work physically, and there's also a lot of harassment. Nowadays, a lot of people don't want you to stop on their land, as they call it. In the old days, it was much easier because nobody minded very much if we stopped on roadsides, in unused fields. And of course, many of our ancestors made a very good living for themselves, helping out, doing blacksmithing, horse trading, veterinary medicine on the horses, music and entertaining, of course, and also, of course, the magical side of things, healing, fortune telling, and so on. You have to find somewhere that's not too far from a clean stream, or perhaps in the modern world, a pub or a shop or something that are kind enough to let you use their water tap. For fire, you either take charcoal, or if you're somewhere where there is plenty of fallen wood that you can pick up and use. Bride price is quite a common practice in many different clans. So the prospective husband's family make a payment to the prospective wife's family once the marriage has been agreed. And really it's an earnest of good behaviour by the two young people. If for example, the husband mistreats the wife can return to her family and she can seek a ruling from the Kris, which is the Romani version of the Panchayat, the Indian tribal court. And if they agree that the marriage was abusive, then the marriage will be overturned, but the bride price will be forfeit, so the bride's family will keep it because the husband was at fault. Conversely, if a marriage breaks up because the bride is at fault, the bride price would be returned to the groom's family. So it's kind of an earnest of good intent that the couple will behave themselves. Freedom does not have to be nomadism, because that is no longer traditional among so many Roma. But it is the freedom to live according to the rules of our culture and not be forced to become gaji. We very commonly don't like petty rules and regulations. Of course, you have to have some rules and regulations if you're going to live in a city alongside a lot of other people, but we really don't like petty officialdom, being constrained. And particularly we don't like anybody attempting to take our culture away from us, to force us to lose our language, to force us to lose our culture, to force us to lose our customs. Any of that would be very offensive to us. We maintain links among ourselves. We keep ourselves a little bit separate. We have a concept of avripen, which means separateness, literally awayness. We slightly hold ourselves back from the gaji, prefer the company of our own people, and particularly we try very hard to keep our own culture alive, our language, our storytelling, our music, our dance, our song. For centuries we have been very badly persecuted. The perhaps best known persecution is the Holocaust, where 7 or 8 million Roma were murdered by the Nazis, but there have been many other persecutions over the last many centuries since we came to Europe. For example, in what's now Germany, in the 16th century, the white people were not only permitted but encouraged to hunt Roma for sport and kill us like animals. There were many other examples of that kind of hideous persecution, and so for that reason we hold ourselves back a little bit, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to trust outsiders. We want to interact with Gajkani society but not be assimilated into it. That's a big issue for us, because Many Roma across Europe still live in poverty, in exclusion. In many countries we are ghettoised, we are not permitted to live in the white parts of town, we are denied education, we're denied healthcare, we're even denied sanitation and electricity, and that's a big problem, of course. But unfortunately, when the Gypsy governments even try to do anything about it at all, they do it with an approach of assimilation, where they insist that we give up our language, we give up our culture, we give up our separateness, and we just turn into brown gaji. And we're not prepared to do that. We are very happy to trade with outsiders, to work with outsiders, subject to getting to know them, to be friends with outsiders, but we don't want to have other people's ways forced onto us. We want to keep our own. And that's a really huge issue for us. And for me personally, I would do anything rather than give up my culture. To me, coming from a quite traditional group, the idea of saying that this piece of land belongs to me and you lot can't camp on it when it's open land is incomprehensible, really. The whole idea of land ownership doesn't work in our culture. We say that humans don't own the land owns us. And we keep the land as a sacred trust for our children. Respecting the land and the nature is a huge, huge part of our culture. Another interesting point related to land ownership is a large part of the reason that we have acquired an undeserved reputation as thieves over the centuries, apart from simple racism, is that when it comes to crops in the fields or in fruit in the orchards or something, our way of thinking about the land is that the fruits of the earth belong to everybody. And so if your children are hungry, what's wrong with taking some apples out of the orchard? What's wrong with taking a few rabbits from the woods? What's wrong with cutting a few handfuls of grain from the field? It's God's bounty for everyone. But of course the landowning outsiders don't see it that way. And, oh, those horrible gypsies have stolen a handful of corn and they've stolen my apples. Nowadays we have an enormous problem with finding places that we can stop for those of us who remain nomadic. In my grandmother's time, there was much less problem. There were many bits of uncultivated land on the roadside, maybe fields that were left fallow, common land, moorland that wasn't cultivated. There were many places where nobody would mind if the travelling Roma stopped for a little while. Very often also they would work for the local farmers or the local villagers, so there would be a nice trading relationship, and the visits were often welcomed because there were special skills that we had, healing the animals, sharpening the knives, doing a bit of metalwork, entertaining, of course, that's always been a very big part of our traditions, doing some fortune telling and magic. But as time went on through the 20th century, it became more and more difficult to make a living in the traditional professions. The idea of land ownership and land enclosure became much stricter. In the communist countries there was deliberate political sedentarization of Roma, and all in all many of the nomadic clans settled down. And so now it's only a very, very tiny minority of us that remain nomadic. In my family, the magical side of things is still very, very strong. My maternal lineage, being Javahonia, that's witches, magic workers for centuries, and down to my great-grandmother's time, that was their main employment for the women. The healing is based on two different strands. One is herbalism. We brought our own herbal healing traditions with us from India and added to them new plants as we learnt them in Europe. And I still know quite a lot of those traditions. We also have a magical healing tradition which is based partly on invocations and I suppose what you could call prayers, but more so on manipulating the body's energy, manipulating the aura of the body. Generally, among those of us who still have the language, the culture follows very close behind, and we have that two-part sense of identity based on our language, based on our culture. We actually have a saying, "Connigenel I romanicib Romnai," which means anyone who doesn't speak Romanes isn't Roma. So our culture is still overwhelmingly oral because of the high rates of illiteracy, because traditionally it's been an oral culture ever since we left India. Our song, dance, storytelling and so on is our cultural glue. And as long as we have that, I believe our culture will survive. It's when that is lost, the language, the storytelling, the music, the dance, then we're finished. What is done in the name of the Roma, but without the Roma, is done against the Roma. If people who are not Roma say, oh, what the Roma need is assimilation, being instructed in how to fit into Western culture, blah, blah, blah. We don't like that because at worst, it's the white saviour complex. At the worst, it's enforced assimilation. And we don't like that. You know, we're not stupid. We don't need to be talked down to. What we need really is simply an end to racism and equality of opportunity. And if we are not held down by oppression, we will do perfectly well for ourselves. Thank you.